Greetings. I'm Kate Rademacher, and we're here with Writing for Your Life and Compassionate Christianity. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. We're talking to Matthew Ian Fleming, and Matthew is the author of a new book, The End is the Beginning: Revelation, Hope, and the Love That Lit the Stars. And I was really blessed to get a copy. Yay! You'll have to do it again when. And it was published by Broadleaf Books, and it's great. It's awesome. Matthew's a really smart writer. He's witty and engaging, and I really been drawn into this book, so I'm excited to talk about it. And it focuses on Revelation, a book in the Bible I think many of us struggle with or have questions about. So this will hopefully be helpful to many folks. But to start off, Matthew, if you can just kind of introduce yourself, and I know you're a pastor. You're obviously a writer, and as we were saying, you're a digital entrepreneur. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your background before we kind of jump into talking about your book. So again, welcome, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's delightful to meet you, and I'm grateful for this group of writers and curious people of faith. So happy to be a part of this community here today. I grew up in fundamentalism, so that's where my story starts, and especially my story with this book of Revelation, because it's often used in those circles as a blueprint for the end of the world, sometimes as a prediction to be unlocked. And so I had a lot of baggage myself coming into studying the book of Revelation. But also, it also has just left me with a lot of bruises in the Bible in general. So my writing and my preaching and my thinking about faith circles around that pathway of having a lot of inherited things that we're questioning and critical about. And sometimes the whole house of cards falls apart as you start pulling some of those out. But also living on the other side of that, of wondering about how can we live into a faith that honors some of that inherited past, even while we're critical and pushing back and deconstructing is the word that we often use more often these days. How can we also look forward into a more hopeful future? So, my work as a pastor is grounded in helping people find new pathways and evolving pathways into their own faith lives. And also, my writing, I hope, at its best, does some of that. And my work in the digital space does that as well. I lead an organization called Church Anew, which supports congregations and the people who lead them all over the country with resources and training and online material that you can use that has a fresh, bold, and faithful witness in the world.
Well, that's awesome. It sounds like you're just doing incredible things and incredible ministry. It sounds like you're busy. Well, I'm glad you found the time to write this book. Again, the title is "The End is the Beginning," and as I was mentioning to you briefly before we started, this book was timely for me because I'm currently in seminary, and words are swirling around me like eschaton and apocalyptic, and I realized I have a very poorly defined or conceptualized understanding for myself, like a personal theology of the end times. So I was excited to read your book, and then I'm learning so much about Revelation. Holy smokes, who knew? So maybe you can just give us an overview of the book. What were you trying to hope? What were you trying to accomplish, and sort of the scope of it? And again, maybe you can start by holding up the cover so that we can see. All right, thanks.
So here's the book. I'm just really grateful for the team at Broadleaf Books to bring a cover alive. As a new author, it's really exciting. It was so exciting to just hold the book in my hands. Yes, Revelation is a provocative text. I mean, we all know that, and I think depending on what stream of Christianity you come from, Revelation is either a book that never gets touched in a lot of mainline and Roman Catholic spaces. Revelation is that kind of forgotten corner. It's the uncle at the family gathering that we just kind of let ramble on and ignore most of the time. In fact, John Calvin, who was one of the reformers, famously wrote a commentary on every book of the Bible. except for one. And that one book that he avoided was Revelation. Martin Luther, who is another reformer, had some pretty fiery words about the book of Revelation, and didn't think people should study it because it would lead them astray. On the other side of the spectrum, in more evangelical or fundamentalist or charismatic spaces, oftentimes Revelation is used a lot, and sometimes as a way to actually instill fear, fear of your own salvation, fear of what God might do. There's a classic example in the 1970s of a film called A Thief in the Night. And it begins with this clock that's ticking aggressively, and uses kind of Alfred Hitchcock style horror as a means to talk about what would happen if Jesus came and half of Earth's population was swept away in the rapture, right? So I grew up in that field more, in a field that was really curious about Revelation. My mom told me she saw that movie as a kid and it scared her, just absolutely terrified her. I grew up more in the Left Behind series times, which are more action, heroic, but still left me with a lot of fear about when Jesus might come. So much so that when I was a kid, and you know that moment where your parents are maybe in the next, they've moved on from the taco aisle in the grocery store, and you're looking down on the bottom shelf at something, and you look up and they're gone. My gut reaction was, they've been raptured, which I can laugh at now.
Yeah.
But as a child, that happens 3 or 4 times, and you're just left with this consistent sense that our faith is about fear. And so I entered Revelation out of curiosity, because people are curious about it. Anytime you say we're going to talk about Revelation, oddly enough, people turn up for it. And in a time when Bible studies are not bursting at the seams, it was interesting to see how people were curious. But I had a lot of learning to do as well. So when I was a pastor here in our congregation and people wanted me to teach about this book, I had just as much to learn and unlearn as our community. And so we did that together, and that was really the source of much of the material in the book, was actually teaching this with people and hearing what their stories of this book were. And so my goal in writing it was really to open up this book of Revelation so that it doesn't have to be this terrifying thing that we're left with all sorts of bruises about, or something that we just ignore and chalk up to the more fear-mongering communities in our table. And I think, if I'm to add one more point, there's a real reason to actually talk about this book. If we let the angrier, noisier, louder voices in our shared public theological ecosystem, if we let them have this book, they'll take it into all sorts of places that are not helpful and can be really harmful and even dangerous. So I think it's really important that people of faith have a basic understanding of this book so that we're not led astray, or radicalized, as we see many spaces in our world today, too.
Well, thank you for that. Really interesting. And one thing I appreciated about the book is you have two chapters back to back about Revelation is not, what Revelation is. And so maybe you could just say a little bit about what Revelation is not. And in particular, you had a sentence, one of the most common misconceptions of Revelation is that it's a manual for the end of the world. And again, I think that's sort of what you're saying. People take this and run with it in all sorts of, dangerously literal or, kind of crazy offshoot ways. So
Yeah.
just briefly, like what would you say is the important thing to keep in mind about where Revelation is not?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I use the example of like the IKEA manual that it shows you pictures of exactly what's going to happen. Revelation is not a blueprint. It's not a manual for the end of the world. But that was the way that I was taught, is that if we can just see all of these things taking place, we'll be able to see, and it proves that Jesus has always been leading us in this direction. But that's not the way that the book was written. That's not the way that apocalyptic literature, and that's what Revelation ultimately is a prime example of apocalyptic literature. That's not how it functions. It uses these wild, um, provocative images, dreamlike, almost influenced by a trance or an alternative state of reality. These images actually function to pull people out of their reality and to say something really crystal clear about the moment that they're living in. And I think it's really easy to see something written more than 2,000 years ago as something that we don't have any access to that imagination. But if you use like The Handmaid's Tale as a post-apocalyptic form of literature, at its best, that kind of work, like The Handmaid's Tale, spins a reality that feels incredibly different than the world that we're in. But it's not the differences that kind of get under our skin. It's actually the ways that it speaks about our shared reality now that makes it so compelling. Whether it's Handmaid's Tale or The Last of Us, the zombie series, each of these, at their best, actually say something really true about our world while they're showing us something radically different. And Revelation, the very first word of it is apocalypsis in Greek, which actually means unveiling, making clear, revealing. It's like it tears open the curtains so that we can actually see what's moving in front of us. So learning how to read Revelation has meant saying no to some of those things that I grew up with, that it's a blueprint for the end of the world, that it's a code to be unlocked, that if we can just understand how to make these connections, it means saying no to that in order that we might be able to hear how this book was written for the original hearers and how it might also be speaking into our moment now.
Well, thank you for that, and such a good cautionary word. And so, on the flip side, maybe can you say a little bit about more about, if I'm interested in reading Revelation or, seeking a new look at it, what would you say Revelation is? And you've already touched on a few things, sort of it's important to understand it's in historical context. I also thought it was interesting how you tied it to some of the prophetic
Mhm.
traditions. So yeah, like just briefly, if I'm like, hey, Pastor Matthew, I want to reread Revelations. What is it all about? What would you say?
Yeah, so again, my hope for this book, it's not a verse by verse commentary. It's more of a challenge to say you can do this. You can read this book. And I had a good reminder, and I usually start with this now. At the beginning, when someone asks me that question, is well, first, like Revelation isn't the only book of the Bible. So if it's the first book that you're reading in Scripture, I might say, why don't you try this one instead? Read one of the Gospels. Read the book of Genesis. Read Exodus. Read some Psalms. It helps to understand bits and pieces of scripture, not only because Revelation is one of the stranger books of the Bible, but also because Revelation consistently speaks about other parts of scripture and uses all of those themes throughout the book of Revelation. So you can't really understand Revelation unless you've actually spent a little bit of time in other parts of scripture. And that's probably some of the wisdom of John Calvin and Martin Luther in just giving people some caution. But you can read this, and so I begin by reading the first several verses of Revelation carefully, because it actually tells us what it is. And first, it's an apocalypsis. It's a kind of literature that people in the ancient world were really familiar with. We have examples of apocalyptic literature in the Bible, outside of the Bible, in that apocryphal part of the Bible that some traditions keep and some traditions don't, in the extra books that didn't make it into the final canon of our scriptures, but still were being used in ways in the ancient worlds. So we have examples of what this literature looked like. So people would have had a very attuned sense of how they receive this. And so I use the analogy of post-apocalyptic literature to help us understand, like, hey, we understand what those sorts of films and television and comic books, what they do to us. The second thing that it is it's a letter. Revelation actually begins with letters to seven distinctive places that had real challenges, and that roots it in a context. And it's a letter that was meant to be read aloud in that community, that they would hear something in this. So when we read it, the invitation always is, well, who was this for? What were their concerns? What were their fears? How did the book actually inspire them or challenge them? And then finally, it's a prophecy. And you might be wondering, like, well, wait a minute, prophecy is about predicting the future. But in the biblical context, it's less about predicting the future and more about calling God's people back to faithfulness. If it points to the future, it's in a way that shows people where this is all going so that they might return to God and perhaps avoid this calamity that's in front of them. So it shakes people to their bones and asks them to return to faithfulness to God. So Revelation is an apocalypse, apocalyptic kind of literature. It's a letter to seven churches, and third, it's a prophecy meant to call people back to faithfulness.
Well, thank you so much. That's a really helpful sort of framework. Um, well, maybe we can pivot for a minute. And as you mentioned, or I know we talked about offline. This is your first book. Congratulations! And so exciting, and what a great one. So, I just love to ask you kind of what any lessons learned you've had from writing or publishing this, particularly publishing it. Like, has there been any aha moments or lessons learned? Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a first time book of mine. Like I said, it had been kind of um, stirring in me for a number of years as I taught it, as I wondered about how it might help people, as I saw places in the world that use Revelation in a way that was less than helpful, or downright dangerous. So my learnings were every step along the way in terms of writing, in terms of finding the time and space to do it, in terms of the whole publishing process. I think the first lesson learned for me was to make writing a practice, and to be disciplined about it. I'm a pastor in my day-to-day life, so I write in a functional way, when I need it on a deadline, for a sermon, for a newsletter article, for a whatever. But I wasn't often in the practice of writing for myself. And so this challenge kind of caught me. I had the book proposal that a friend of mine helped me create, and the publisher was excited about it. So the contract came before the writing was done in my experience, which I know is not everybody's experience, um, but actually sitting down and walking through a daily practice of writing. The practice that I used was The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, and I did The Artist's Way with a group of other writers and creatives and people who were just trying to find a way to work this through. And I was seeing that I was behind deadline and nervous about a bunch of other things. But the Artist's Way introduces you to morning pages. So the first thing you do in the morning is you sit down and you write 3 pages longhand in just like a ratty composition notebook. And you don't keep this writing. It's not for anybody. It doesn't have it's not going to go sit on a shelf anywhere. But you just write, and it gets the practice going so that then writing more sentences later in the day becomes easier. And having a group of people that hold you accountable and are encouraging you, really helped me as well. So I think the daily practice of writing and a community of people really helped me. In terms of the publishing uh, process, I think one of the things that surprised me is that publishers really rely on an author's existing platform and ability to share the book broadly. And so I think my success at being able to get a contract for this book was not because that was a great idea, but because of all of, I mean, maybe, I mean, I hope that was a piece of it, right? But it was largely because I had done the work of building Church Anew that reaches a broad audience, and so there was a distribution channel ready to go. I think in the world that we're in with publishing, that I hear that more and more from other authors that doing the work of building a platform is really crucial work for us as authors. And there are really great tools to help you do that. Digital tools like website design, Substack, that is relatively recent. In fact, when we launched Church Anew, it was before Substack. There are great ways that you can build a community around the kinds of ideas and the kinds of conversations you want to host. And don't be shy to ask people in your network who might have a platform already to help you build something new.
Well, that all really resonates. So thanks for sharing. It's always good to hear. I mean, we have so many folks who love the artist way. And then what you said about the necessity of an author having a platform and the ways publishing has changed. It's, as you said, very consistent pattern. So, well, let's move back to talking about your book. And, one thing that really surprised me from reading it was how politically relevant Revelation is in so many different ways. And, um, in these times, which are pretty scary, there's a lot of division, obviously, but, just sort of scary political stuff happening and confusing.
Yeah.
Maybe can you just say a few words about sort of what Revelation, sort of how it plays out in the political arena and sort of what
Yeah.
maybe we need to be watching out for as educated citizens?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, if you grew up in one of those traditions that just avoided it, the danger with that there is there are traditions who are using this book as a blueprint for the apocalypse. So you hear in my no, it's not that, is speaking to a community of people who are using this in a very specific way. I mean, we live in a deeply divided, deeply challenging time. And so did the people who heard this book. So I think there's some solidarity in that first, that as we read Revelation, we're reading a book that was written to people um, who were experiencing oppression from from the Roman Empire, the biggest superpower on the planet at the time, and in a time of real upheaval within that empire that caused all sorts of dangers for other people around the edges. So I think there's some solidarity that we can hear in Revelation from the stories of people. On the side of folks who will use this to lead people astray, there are a lot of movements within Christianity, especially along fundamentalist lines, that will use Revelation to put a crown on a political ruler here. Who will look at a demagogue that we might elect here in the United States and say, that is proof that Jesus is coming. Um, and in a system and in a structure that mobilizes people around fear and mobilizes people around potential violence, that can be a really dangerous thing. We're learning a lot more, especially from my colleague Angela Denker, around white Christian nationalism and the radicalization of white men, especially. Um, that there are places on the internet that will radicalize people using fragments of truth, or or lies sprinkled with just enough truth that they can step by step lead people into a place where they could storm the United States Capitol, right? Into a place where they could commit untold atrocities. I write in the book about the painful acknowledgement that that the shooter of the Emmanuel 9 tragedy, who came into a church Bible study in a historic black congregation and killed not a bunch of people in an awful, terrible incident, actually grew up in the same congregation, in the same denomination as the congregation I serve. And living with that reality and recognition, it instills in me a desire to help the 13-year-old boys who come to confirmation class here, and the 19-year-old kids who are uncertain about what their future is, the folks who dropped out of college and can't find a pathway forward. I mean, there are people who are being left behind to use that image by our economy, by our politics, by our congregations, by our communities, and we're living with the ramifications of that right now. So I think the dangers of Revelation, we can see them. They're used, and you don't have to look very far on social media or on the internet to find places where people will use this text to radicalize folks. Um, so on the flip side of that, if we actually read this book in a way that it was heard in its initial context, it lays bare the powers of this world that will trample and oppress folks in our communities, and they are in fact characterized as beasts and dragons and forces. Um, and the book of Revelation is not a book to put a crown on those powers, but actually undermines their authority by showing that God has ultimately already won. Um, and not through the huge battlefield scenes, but actually through this crucified Christ. The Lamb who was slain is at the center of Revelation, is the most powerful figure in Revelation, is a lamb. I mean, you see dragon and beast and all sorts of powerful armies, but the creature who ultimately leads to victory in the end of Revelation is a lamb. So the invitation of Revelation is to follow in the footsteps of that lamb, to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, and to learn from the politics that Jesus embodied. I might just add one more hopeful piece, uh, because Revelation is ultimately a book of hope. It's easy to get stagnant in the what can I do? These people will abuse this book and take it and steal it, and maybe we should just delete it from history or something. But Revelation, I think, deserves reckoning with because it's a book that's meant to give people hope in the midst of really trying, challenging political realities. And at the end of Book of Revelation, of the Book of Revelation, and again, it resonates with my title, "The End is the Beginning." But if you begin reading this book at the very end, it leaves you with three visions of what God is hoping for in creation. And the first is a new heaven and a new earth, not wiping away and starting over, but actually creating something new out of this world that is in so much chaos. And the second is a new city, and it's where we get the images of the pearly gates, right? But this new city has gates, 12 gates, and these numbers, read the book and you can read my book, you can get a little understanding of the numbers, um, uh, but the gates are flung wide open, and this city is big enough for all of humanity to live in, where nations bring the best of who they are to bear. It's a vision of peace and of hope And then finally, it's a vision of a new garden, back to that Garden of Eden where things went awry, or at least we've inherited that story. But God is creating a garden with food for everyone to eat and leaves, the leaves of the trees for the healing of the nations. So my hope is that Revelation, in deeply trying political times, read in community, read as a persistent invitation to stay in the work, um, to not get apathetic, to be deeply engaged in the work that won't let those people be left behind or forgotten, but that works to tend those people in our communities who are vulnerable, to the beasts who are prowling. And ultimately, it gives us the fierce authority to say that those prowling beasts, that they will have their end, that they will have their end. So yeah, I think it's a hopeful book in its end, for all of us in these really really challenging political times.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew. You're inspiring me to take another careful look and meditation on Revelation. So and sort of drawing these bigger linkages is super helpful. Well, thank you again. Congratulations on this book launch. And maybe we can just wrap up by you can tell us sort of how we can stay in touch with you, where we can get the book, how we can find out more about your work, including Church and New, and just if you have any final thoughts or new projects you want to tell us about. Thanks again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. It's been a joy to have the conversation, Kate. I hope your studies in seminary. I hope maybe you'll get an opportunity to study Revelation in seminary too. Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook and those sorts of places. Although I'm not as fervent in my digital space there. But churchanew.org is where you can follow the work that I'm a part of. And it's a community-led movement. But I'd encourage you to check out churchanew.org. You can join our newsletter on that website, and check out all of the things that we're up to there. Um, uh, I'm sorry, what was the last question, Kate?
Well, I assume we can get your book wherever books are
Oh
sold.
yes,
That's
yeah,
like the classic answer, right?
you can get the book wherever books are sold, but ask for it at your local library.
That's a good one.
I think our libraries are librarians are incredible, um, community leaders in our grassroots world. And so, if you're looking for a book, ask for it at your local library. They'll order it for you, absolutely, if they don't have it already. Or go to your local bookstore and ask somebody there. But yes, you can get it wherever you rely on books. It's also available on audiobook. And the strangest thing about back to publishing is hearing someone else read your words. It's an odd feeling as someone who writes how I often speak. But it's available on audiobook and Kindle and in print wherever you'd like to find books.
Well, that's awesome, Matthew. Well, I'm so grateful for you for your awesome and excellent words. Really, you're very, in addition to just having great substance to share, you're a great writer. So thank you for that. And congratulations and blessings on this book launch, and for all the many ministries you're involved in, which are really, important and forward-looking and creative. So thank you again. And just as a reminder, the title of Matthew's book is The End is the Beginning, Revelation, Hope, and the Love That Lit the Stars. So thanks again, Matthew.
Thank you, Kate. It was delightful to meet you.
All right. Have a great day and keep us posted on how the book makes its way out into the world.
Will
All right.
do.
Take care. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.